Okay, so thanks to all of you connecting today, and of course to Johan, Michael and Vicente for having me here. It's a great pleasure to be back at Orpheus, if only virtually, and to see many known people here in the crowd. So I will start with just 1 minute of music. I try to share now my screen, and please, if you cannot hear, just tell me or write. Yes, so I would like to link to the double theme of the conference, so emergence, emergency, on 3 aspects actually, on 3, let's say, levels. So the first level is the emergence of sound in the cultural category of music. We might say, as Michele suggested also this morning, perhaps the sound as the other of music, but of course another which is implicated in music. The second level is the relation between the human and the non-human, or we can say its environment as a theme of emergency. And again, similarly, we have a human who interrogates itself on what it is not, but paradoxically doing so from a human position. So again, we have a relation between a self and another, which is paradoxical and complicated. And the third level is the reason why we are all here, we might say, namely the overarching theme of artistic research, which is a mode of knowledge that, in my vision, challenges precisely traditional disciplinary compartmentation. So again, we have a confrontation with an outside that questions a kind of inside. And I would like to start actually from this last point, because I will present a strategy in this project which is at its very start, so it's very fresh and it's great to present it here and have your feedback as well. So a strategy that I have been using for many years in artistic research, namely to make my own practice, which is music performance and composition, react with concepts and operative functionalities that come from practices other than music. And this in order to do away with commonsensical approaches, so to my own commonsensical approach, but also to our shared commonsensical approaches to practice, and even to, let's say, the resistance that materials, media, and modes of inscriptions themselves impose on imagination. So this project is called Rhopophony, which is an enigmatic word, but don't worry, I will explain in just a minute. And so in it, I try to challenge my practice through a historical practice that comes from painting. So this whole project started in a very simple way, from a kind of intuition, and that's a way that for me works really well for artistic research. So I decided to explore an interest that I had been nurturing for many, many years, but never investigating for a specific form of painting, namely still life. And I'm sure you are familiar with still life, but I show just some examples. These are photos I took from a recent visit at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. And so I started asking myself, is it possible to derive some operative tools from this practice and apply them to music? So while studying still life, I came across this study by Norman Bryson called Looking at the Overlooked, where Bryson makes some fundamental points. So first of all, he proposes, not the one inventing it, but he proposes the concept of Rhopography, which is a Greek-derived word that means the portrayal of trivial and humble things, as opposed to megalography, which would be the portrayal of big events, well-known characters, etc. Then Bryson underlines three incredibly powerful political implications of Rhopography. First of all, Rhopography, or still life, portrays subjects that every single human being on the planet is familiar with. It's very hard to think that there are people on the planet that don't relate to pottery, for example, and it's impossible to think that there are people who don't relate to food. Secondly, still life interrogates the viewer on a fundamental question, and this is the question with which I open this presentation, namely, where is man? So we noticed in still life a constant and almost uncanny absence of the human presence. But of course, at the same time, the human is strongly present, let's say, as a fabricator or consumer of these objects that are portrayed, but also taking a step back, of course, as a fabricator or consumer of art, no? As a painter or as a viewer. But the most crucial point that immediately triggered my musical imagination is that still life makes visible objects that are not meant for sight. So in our daily life we all relate to objects that of course do have visual and aesthetic properties, but we don't really see them because we are so familiar with them that we don't notice them anymore, let's say. However, we have a very close relationship of familiarity with them, but this relationship, Bryson says, is enacted through weight, through the weight of these objects. So when I hold, for example, a cup in my hand and every day I lift it to drink, I single it out through the weight. I, so to speak, ontologize this cup through its weight. Still life does something special because it brings to the realm of the visible something that is not visible, but is made to lift and to touch. Thus, Rhopography has been asking for centuries questions that today are very urgent for our society, like what deserves to be represented? What is the role of man in the environment or in the world? And what is the relation between man and objects? We can think of so many philosophical currents that have these questions at their core today, no? Okay, I will stop this. Let us come from Rhopography now to Rhopophony. Let's see what it means. So first of all, Rhopophony would be the portrayal of trivial sounds, and I'm so glad Agostino this morning mentioned these insignificant sounds, because that's very relevant now for this project. So you immediately understand that rhopophony is a new word, it's a new concept, but it does not come from nothing, no? There is already a long history of interest in trivial sounds. I might mention the obvious, the usual suspects, let's say Luigi Russolo, Edgar Varèse, Pierre Schaeffer, who is a big reference in this project, even with a long distance that I take from Schaeffer. But also, rhopophony kind of becomes integrated, let's say, becomes a compositional point in composers who place the listening act at the center of their compositional trajectory. And I might mention Luigi Nono, who is a reference here, especially the late Nono, but of course Helmut Lachermann very prominently, Morton Feldman, Salvatore Scerrino, and of course many others are thinkable. And we might even think of later practices such as field recording, sampling, or even sound art as a whole, meant here as a kind of other of music. We might discuss about this. So what is the original contribution of rhopophony? I would like to concentrate on this idea of, I don't know if it's the right word, but re-ontologizing sonic entities through the concept of sonic weight. So what it means, how does sound have a weight? So first of all, I would like to consider, it's already been pointed out by someone today, this primacy of vision in our culture, but of course also in music. I would like to point out the kind of elephant in the room that is there for us musicians, namely that for 1,000 years, my good friend Paolo De Cisa has recently pointed out this parenthesis of 1,000 years of notated music, which is very short if you think about it. But for 1,000 years now, sound has been categorized and ontologized and singled out through visual categories. So the elephant in the room is that music is a visual art for us, for our culture, of course. And today, after the advent of phonography, of course, many things have changed, but not so much, because we still measure, understand, and communicate about sound largely through optical devices, which also refer to symbolic categories you might think of when we do computer music. Of course, it's a visual device. The screen is a visual device. So what does it mean to re-ontologize sonic entities through their weight? What is the weight of a sonic object? And here, of course, you are immediately reminded of l'objet sonore of Schaeffer. So I understand this weight as the capability to affect bodies. And it's important that this affection happens at multiple levels, and here we see how far I am also from Schaeffer. So, of course, physically, through the material event of sound, but also culturally and historically, because sound is always fraught with memories and shared understandings. You might think of Lachemann's aura, emotionally, etc. So that there is always an infinity of components that cross this concept of sonic weight. So, sonic objects, as I intend them, are not identifiable through opticality, so using a form of notation to represent them. And here, for Schaeffer, phonographic notation is still a form of representation to me, even if, of course, then perception comes in the way, and we might discuss about it. But rather, I ask myself how they could be notationally, optically, visually different, but still maintain the same weight. So be the same even if they look different. To stay in the metaphor, as if I'm looking at an object that I'm holding in my hands, so this trivial object, and of course every time I look at it, it's different. No reference to Merleau-Ponty, but the weight remains the same. So in its duration, in the duration of my relationship to this object, the object remains the same. So maybe I can play some examples of what I mean. So for example, let's see if we hear this. Yeah. One object. Again, the same object. So if I notate it, it's different. It's totally different, but the weight stays the same. And again, or another object. So a different weight, different weight. The same object again. So optically different, but it's the same, etc. So finally, and this is my last point, then I think I'm out of time. Another important point of this project is how do I organize such objects throughout time? So objects, you might think like really the objects in a still life. And this is another research trajectory, which is the suspension of teleological temporality. So instead of a development throughout a linear time, I would like to create a form through parataxis, and here another example from the Ashmolean Museum. Yes, so of course this is also not a new thing, no? The creation of a time that is not linear but circular or suspended. But still I would like to face it through a slightly new or different conceptualization, namely again making music react with painting, with the visual arts. And investigating the common ground between music and painting, namely that, contrary to what common sense suggests, both are time-based arts, not only the former, with the difference that while music necessarily, I'm thinking about notated music for sure, imposes a temporal organization which is linear and with all the notable exceptions that we know fixed, painting demands from the observer that he or she organize their own temporality in a very banal way. For example, deciding for how long one looks at a painting, but in a less banal way, through the rhythmicality that one gives to one's own gaze, of course in response and reaction to the rhythmicality that is composed in the painting. So my strategy so far, and this is also how I built the sketch that I presented to you, and I will replay it shortly, was to create what I call an algorithmic gaze. So I created an algorithm, and we are back to opticality. So this is also an acknowledgement, this project is an acknowledgement that there are categories which are stronger than our own will to evade them. Okay, but I created this algorithm which, instead of organizing the sound objects to a preconceived temporality, triggers them throughout time, and frames them in a rhythmical and repetitive temporality that is inspired by that of painting. So I will play again this example. So this could go on infinitely. It's a automatic system in which I have used MIDI piano. So I've built these objects with a MIDI piano, but also I've built how the objects are organized in time. And then I have used also some pre-recorded and processed samples. But For the future, I also have plans for working with live performance. So also asking what this could mean. No, I stop it. What this could mean in the sense of fabricating sonic objects for a performance according to this idea of weight again, and what would be the relation between this sonic gaze and live performance. So the interaction and the possibilities are really infinite. To conclude, before receiving your very wished for questions and feedback, I would like to underline that this project is just starting now, and that it wants to be collective and it wants to be bottom up. So in case any of you is interested in also taking part or contributing in any capacity, the organizers have my contact, and do get in touch if you're interested. Thank you very much for your attention.